Hi, this is Carl with another SOP video for managed service providers. Today I want to talk about 13 troubleshooting techniques. In the last video we talked about rules for troubleshooting, which is to say big picture guidelines, things like slow down, get more done, document all your work. Today I want to talk about the things you do and you have to figure out the order in which you're going to do them. One of the best things you can do to learn how to troubleshoot really well is to spend a lot of time troubleshooting. At the end of the day, there's really no substitution for seeing a problem again and again and again until you finally figure out how you troubleshoot with that specific technology, whether it's USB, network, video, sound, whatever it might be. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. So the one thing that you can't shortcut is knowing more and more stuff just because you've had the experience. What you can shortcut is figuring out what you do first and what you do second. So let me go through 13 quick troubleshooting techniques. First one is start with the highest probability. For example, back in the days of NT4, if you said there's a problem with the network, I would say check the cables, check the connections. Today, if you say there's a problem with the network, I'm going to say check the DNS. So the most likely thing that's going to go wrong in a certain system is some specific technology. So learn what that is, check that thing first. As silly as it sounds, the order in which you do these things makes a huge amount of difference. Number two, start with the physical. So even though we're well beyond the days of checking cables to see if the network is part of the problem, it's still the case that you can have loose memory, loose processors, loose USB cables, loose network connections. Very often it is literally that simple. So check that stuff first. Don't go down, the road to other things that may or may not be relevant. Number three, start with the program. This is kind of the opposite of the last one. So the last one said start with the physical and move up to the program. Now we're going to start with the program and move down to the physical. Sometimes it's obvious that some little thing just needs to change. Some part of the program, some setting, right? Start there. And again, the more knowledge you have, the more likely you are to find the right thing first. Number four, apply all the patches, fixes, and updates. Think about how many times you call tech support. The first question is, what's the patch level? What's the ISO level, whatever. If you get everything up to date, hardware, software, network, the whole deal, and then call tech support, you may have fixed a lot of problems before you ever get to the point where you have to call tech support. So just make sure everything is up to date. Obviously, that's where managed services comes in. Number five, figure out what's changed. In most cases, if you've got a problem that suddenly came up, well, there was a client action, there was an update, there was either an automatic update or an intentional update. Something changed. Computers are not random, so errors don't come up randomly. There is a reason for it. You got to figure out what it is. Number six, order matters. Computers, again, are not random. So sometimes you'll say, well, I start this computer, and then when I go A, B, C, I have a problem. When I go B, C, A, I don't have a problem. Okay, let's figure out exactly what was going on at the moment that the problem emerged, and then we can work backwards and try to figure out what is the thing that started us going down the wrong road. Number seven, serial substitution. Some of the things that we troubleshoot have many variables. Probably the most obvious example is TCP/IP itself. You have, IPv6, and you've got older versions, you've got the physical address, you've got the MAC address, you've got routing tables, subnet mask, gateway, host files, DNS, right? There's all kinds of things, and you got to figure out if you know what you have changed, change one thing. If it doesn't work, you can change it back or document what you're doing, change the next thing. But only change one thing at a time and do them in a specific order. The order is something you have to figure out through experience. Number 8, hey, have a troubleshooting checklist. You know when you call the ISP and you say, I'm having trouble getting to the internet, and they say, well, is the router plugged into the wall? And they want to start with stuff that you consider to be very, very basic. They have a fail-proof checklist that starts with, do we have power? Do we have connectivity? Can we get from point A to point B? Does this work? Does this work? Does this work? You need to develop those kinds of checklists within your own company. Specifically, when you know certain technologies, certain products, and certain services, there will develop a good, appropriate order for getting things done. Number 9, reproduce the problem. Great for intermittent problems, right? So if you say, well, I have this intermittent problem, how can we reproduce it? Is there some specific sequence, once again, that allows us to recreate the problem? If there is, then we got to figure out what is happening in that sequence. And then we can begin to figure out what's going sideways, right? But if you can't reproduce the problem, then you have to figure out, how you're going to get the client involved. So number 10 is have users help you with documentation. When I have a particularly troublesome intermittent problem, I literally give instructions to the client, and I have them have a piece of paper so that when something happens, they immediately write down which programs were open, what they were doing, what the last thing is that they did that they noticed. And again, a lot of this may be extraneous information, but somewhere down the line, we're going to figure out where the problem started. Number 11, do you have multiple problems? So we often don't think about the fact that, hey, sometimes there are two things going on. You have a troublesome driver over here, and you just put in some new software. So obviously you think that the last thing that changed is the problem, the new software, but in fact there might be this underlying problem, and now you've got to figure out two things at the same time. Always try to narrow it down and solve one problem at a time. It's nearly impossible to solve two problems at a time. So pick one, fix it, see if you still have the problem, or if it becomes more or less intermittent, then fix the next one. Number 12, sometimes you have product-specific gotchas. So if you deal with a certain kind of computer, a brand name of computer, a brand name of a router, a brand name of printer, or a specific kind of software, whatever it is, when you've got one specific thing, you begin to learn its eccentricities. And then you can say, all right, so here's what happens when we do this with this kind of product, and you develop your troubleshooting techniques around that. This is a really great argument for limiting the number of different brands that you sell, whether it's hardware, software, or services. The fewer brands you have, the more you can see the same kind of consistency within the products that you're selling, and therefore you can solve problems more quickly because you know those product-specific gotchas. And finally, number 13, do you care? Does it matter? If you reboot once every 6 months, do you really care why that's a problem? If that 7 minutes of downtime is acceptable twice a year, maybe you don't have to solve the problem. Maybe you don't have to find it. One of the problems that we have as technicians is we have the kind of brains that really want to dig in there and fix every little thing. Well, sometimes it's just not worth the effort. If you spend 12 unbillable hours trying to fix a problem, you finally conquer it, you've lost all that money, the client couldn't care less, you haven't really fixed anything. So remember, what you want to do is start with the most important things first. You need to figure out a sequence that works for you. And the sequence may be different for networks, software, operating systems, hardware, online services. Figure out what works best for you, and remember, the only way to really get good at this is you have to pay attention to it. Don't just solve problems, but go into a troubleshooting mind frame, and then you'll be able to do it systematically. There's so much more about troubleshooting that I want to cover, so we're going to do a third video and talk about the mind frame of troubleshooting. So tune in again next week. We're going to talk about Number 3 in our 3-part series on troubleshooting, and that is your mind frame. For Small Biz Thoughts, this is Carl Palachuk, wishing you the best of luck in your managed service business. Like it if you like it, share it with your friends, and absolutely subscribe to the channel.